All right, I'm here with Robina Asti in Norwood, Robina's husband. My intention with this interview is to share with you some stories about Robina's life. She's one of the most interesting people that I met in New York City, and I've been in New York City since 1998. She's a pilot. She used to be, or still does, arbitration. Some work with Wall Street. She's a trader. Robina, tell us something about your beginnings. Where were you born?
I was born here in New York City, down in the West Village, 8385 McDougal Street, and the place is still there. Mm-hmm. My father used to have a job lighting the gas lamps in the village.
Wow.
He would light them in the beginning of the evening and get up early in the morning when the sun was up, and he would be turning them down. And the village was a wonderful place. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed living there. I can have very strong memories of stickball games and uncles and aunts and role models and all that kind of thing, all developed from that area. You go down the village today and you go to some of the little shops or go into some of the little pubs and you'll find tin ceilings. That was my father's business at that time. Mm-hmm. Also, I had an uncle that was in the freight business, but he was a very stubborn Italian, and when the crash came, he had to go into bankruptcy because he refused to use those newfangled trucks. He had his horses and wagons and that was it. Mm-hmm. But he failed. I had another uncle who, in those days, all the funerals were held in the apartment of the deceased or the relative, and it was always in the living room. One of my uncles thought, wouldn't it be good to have a funeral home? And on the corner of Bleecker and McDougal, he had a place where he started one of the first funeral homes. Well, that was fun for me as a kid, because it was a time when Dracula used to come out, and I could play in the caskets and pretend to be Dracula and all that kind of thing. But again, he went belly up because, again, he was too early, and Italians always wanted all of their families to have their living rooms. Do you know what it is to take a big casket down a walk up, say 6 flights?
Oh my gosh, a walk up?
Yes, they would do that. Amazing. Well, I went to St. Anthony's, and then I went to a Catholic school in Brooklyn, and then I went to Brooklyn Polytech for college. And all this was during basically the Depression, and I remember I had a quarter a day, 10 cents for the subway back and forth, and 15 cents for lunch or expenses. And I used to be able to save money. Isn't that amazing? Tuition, I think, was $135 for the whole year at that time.
How much was a subway ride?
What? The subway, a nickel.
A nickel.
10 cents back and forth, you know. A nickel ride in the subway. Well, I had an older brother, and he and I were, he picked on my other brother, but my other brother was not interested, so he picked on me, and I was very receptive. And we began to do what was known as technical work in those days, but it was all very mysterious. Electricity was a very mysterious thing in those days. The building was DC electricity. My brother and I converted into AC, the whole building, except the hall lights were gas lamps, and they were permanently gas lamps. But we had radios. We built radios. We made money because on the weekends or on Saturday, we would deliver back all of the work radios that we picked up to work on during the week. And we made a fair amount of money. We were doing very well.
And this was when? What year was this?
In years? Well, let's see. It was all before the war. This was all during the 30s, maybe.
30s. Mm-hmm.
And right in the heart of the Depression, basically. I can remember we built VHF, where the frequency that channel 2 is on now, I think it's 60 megahertz. And we used to build little receivers. We had to use vacuum tubes. And of course, we would take a chip off the Bakelite on the tube because you couldn't get any radio to work because of the lossiness of the Bakelite. So we had to take off the Bakelite to suspend the tube on the wires.
Mm-hmm.
And
no transistors back then.
Yeah. Well, we had a good idea of transmission for at 60 megahertz, that it was limited basically to the line of sight. So we had set up a big adventure to prove it. And we would go up to the buildings. One of us would go up to the Empire State Building when that was built, or at 30 Wall Street, which was a big, tall building, and get in a rowboat and go out the Hudson to see how far the signal could travel. But we couldn't really get some really definitive methods, so we decided we had to learn to fly airplanes to do it. Because then we could take a fixed point and we could go up and find out where the signal disappeared. So we went out to a little airport called Holmes Airport. That was located in Jackson Heights on the North Shore, below where LaGuardia Airport is now, a little bit west of LaGuardia Airport. And we get out on the subway for a nickel. We get off at Jackson Heights and we walk north to the airport. And that was around 76th Street or something like that. I forget the stop. I think it was called Jackson Heights. And we learned to fly. And we then put in equipment. And the equipment was absolutely incredible compared to just this little camera right now, because we would have to get a device that could oscillate, transmit a signal at some frequency. So the only way we could do it would be to take little vacuum tubes. They were number 30. They were light, they were small, and you could take the Bakelite off the bottom, and the pins were fairly good in strength so they wouldn't wobble too much. And we would tune them by using copper tubing that would measure what would be known as quarter wavelengths for it, and then we could have 2 here and 2 here, one for the plate, one for the grid, and we could generate signals. And we would take this in an old biplane up in the air. I mean, everything was shaking, everything was going wild, but it did work. And we did effectively prove that it was good enough for the line of sight. In the meantime, at 40 Wall Street, we set up transmitters with people from England, and we would transmit to them every day to see if there was any way or at any time could they receive a signal from us. No, because the ionosphere would pass the VHF right through, and and it was not possible. So we knew we were on the right track. Well, a basis of that fact, we were trying to sell it to the Navy, because the Navy was paranoid about radio. They had very low frequency transmission. They would use signals way above the broadcast band, way below the broadcast band. And then a shortwave was, of course, go around the world. And here we come along telling the Navy that if a ship, you can see a ship, you can send signals to it. If you can't see the ship, you won't be able to see won't be able to send the signal. And of course, the Navy was using semaphore and lights, and they were very inefficient. And there were a lot of mistakes this way they could get direct communication. We were young kids. I must put this in perspective. The Navy has now millions of men, but in those days, the Navy from top to bottom had 25,000 souls. That's all. That's how big the Navy was in the United States. The Army wasn't much bigger.
How old were you when you started flying?
I started when I was 15, and as soon as I could solo when I was 16, I did, and then I managed to get my license when I was 18, and I've been flying ever since. This is a long time, yeah. Born in 1921, so.
So who taught you how to fly? Who put you in that direction? Who was the person that influenced you to go?
Well, it was both. It was me and my brother. Both of us wanted to learn to fly to prove that VHF signals were only good enough to the line of sight, or slightly beyond. And we were the ones that forced the issue for ourselves. And I fell in love with flying.
But where did you get the plane? How did you went to? There were flight schools back then.
No, there really were flight schools. But there were flight schools, but it really wasn't very well organized, nor were there many. And out at this airport, this small airport, of course, we were a couple of crazy kids, but then they began to enjoy what we were doing, because also radio communications for planes were a possibility with something like this. So that's how we got involved. And the people were just helping us just like mad. I mean, we became so attached to the airport, and the airport was so attached to us. When I would go flying someplace, and I'd take an old biplane, usually you'd have to go. You could go maybe 200 miles, and you'd have to come down and make a landing for repairing something. And they used to give me little kits for repairing the airplane, and would show me how to repair things like the lines would go, because you didn't have neoprene in those days, and so gasoline flowing through the rubber hoses was not very good, and they would break. The oil filter was made up of solder, and of course the airplanes vibrated like mad, and those things would break, and there would be tears in the fabric, and you had to fix the fabric, or the alignment of the wings were out of line a little bit. All those things mattered, and you became quite a mechanic to fly an airplane, at least constantly. Well, we then did manage to get the Navy interested in VHF communications. The war was coming along, and all of the United States pilots were called up by the Royal Canadian Air Force to come and join them when Britain entered the conflict. So a lot of American pilots went up to Canada and became Canadian pilots, Canadian Royal Air Force pilots. That left a dearth of pilots in America. They were all working for the war. Grumman had some new, Grumman out on Long Island had a lot of war contracts to finish. They were building up, and they were experimenting with new airplanes. They came around came around Holmes Airport, and they were looking for pilots. And my brother in the meantime had been left, and he was going off with the United States Air Force doing some special work. So they picked me. And so I became a test pilot for Grumman because of the fact that there wasn't anybody else they could take. And what I had to do was basically take an airplane up to about 14,000 feet, which was the limit that they could get up to, because they weren't no control of the turbocharging or anything. And then I would terminal dive it to the ground. At 2,000 feet, I'd pull it out, and I would pass out. And when I awoke, if the airplane was still flying, that was the test.
Oh my gosh.
That was the test. And you know what it is for your sinuses to go up to 15,000 feet and then dive down at terminal velocity of the airplane and then pull it out? For years my sinuses killed me, but that was quite an experience, and I enjoyed it a lot. And then from there, I got wind of the fact that MIT, and my brother, who was over in England at that time, told me about it, that the Brits had developed what was something called a magnetron, and it was a very high frequency generator, and it was a precision instrument, and it was considered super secret. Mm-hmm. Indeed, it was supposed to be so secret that everything was eyes only. Mm-hmm. And MIT was giving all the plans and all the send-off to produce these magnetrons. I heard about it, so of course I hightailed it off to Boston. Mm-hmm. I got involved with that program. I got involved with a program at Harvard, mm-hmm. and I had a rather good time with it, and I learned a lot about VHF communications. Mm-hmm. This is a time when such esoteric things as waveguides. Mm-hmm. Now, that was the beginning of the microwave oven also, because everybody who had anything to do with microwaves knew that you could cook with them. Mm-hmm. Because people would leave their lunch around them, and suddenly it would be very hot. Mm-hmm. And if you left any metal, it would spark the metal and cause all kinds of problems. So they quickly learned to handle it. And of course, years later, we now know the magnetron is what's in the heart of all microwave ovens. It's a very handy oven.
Very interesting.
Well, that was that. And then during the war, I had a wonderful time during the war. I really did. I worked for the Navy, and I did some work for the Army, but mostly for the Navy. I don't know if you are aviation minded enough, but if you notice that airplanes have little wicks coming off the edge of the wings and around certain places, mm-hmm. they were to take off static electricity. Mm-hmm. Because in flying in and around thunderstorms, the static electricity was enormous. It was absolutely enormous. And you would lose communications, and so I got involved with the Army and that program, and to eliminate static electricity. And these little wicks were part of the deal. Well, that got me out into the Pacific, because we had to prove that this worked all the way through. So we had a couple of airplanes like DC-3s and some PBYs and some big Navy boats, flying boats, and we did that. So that got me involved with the Pacific. There I managed to do a lot of things. I got my first taste of markets. I didn't know anything about the stock market or anything like that at the time, but all facilities of the Navy, whether you're on a boat or a naval air station or at a Navy base someplace, the officers had two devices. One was called the officers' mess, and the other was the officers' lodging. And it would cost the officer so much, and at the end of his stay, he could turn in his 2 shares and he'd get his money back, or whatever value was. And it was published every month. Well, the value varied every month. It varied quite a bit. And I'm flying around and I'm beginning to join the various officers' clubs, and officers' clubs, that's what it was, and officers' mess. And so I got so that I used to begin to compare prices of one place to another place. And when I was high, I would sell my share, and then when it was down low, I'd buy it again. And that was my first, and I made a fair amount of money over the years I was in the Pacific, just buying and selling officers' mess and officer club shares from the various places, because I was going to those places all the time. And of course I was always welcome, because I'd bring mail and all the special stuff that everybody needed. I would just deliver it. Well, also I got involved in watching over all of the battles in the Pacific. And what I was able to do was to radio down to the ground, to the troops that were on the ground, what was going on here, what was going on there. And it became a very important part of all of the invasions. So that came time to get ready for the invasion of Japan. I come back to the United States, and I prepared down in Jacksonville, Florida, for the invasion of Japan, and it was going to be a very, very big thing. But while I was there, in the summer of '45, the Japanese surrendered with the A-bombs being dropped, of which I knew nothing of. Surprisingly, I didn't know anything about the A-bombs at all. I had no inkling that there was some work going on. I was as surprised as the next one. So then, that was the end of the war. Then after that, oh, yes, there was one other thing. My brother talked to some Dutchmen from Eindhoven, Holland, who were refugees from the Germans, and they had come across material. They had developed material known as ferrite material. You know them today as magnets that hold the doors or hold things on your refrigerators, and that's what they were. However, they were unique in the radio spectrum, and that they did improve a lot of qualities of the signal. You could, it became quite an important material. Well, he put me in touch with the people from Eindhoven, and I managed to fly B-24 over to Britain and talk to them, and they were so anxious to just give anybody interested in it, and because the Brits were very busy with all of their war work. I mean, it's a pretty small place relative to the United States, so they had their hands full all during the war. So I learned all about ferrite materials, and indeed, after the war was over, I managed to raise $25,000 and started a business in Yonkers making ferrites, my brother and I. For $25,000 we started a business. Can you imagine that today? We bought all used equipment, and we had a lot of problems being able to do it, but fortunately television came along and we could make all that. We were making ferrites as much as we could, and we were the only ones in the country. However, GE and a few other people were beginning to get into the business, and we had then a lot of competition. So I eventually sold the business, and that's how I got involved with the stock market. Because I invested all the money I made with prudent people, very prudent people, and of course they probably lost half of it for me. And then I realized that, where do I put the money? It's got to be in markets like that, or some other business. And I didn't have any business that I thought was viable enough at the time. So I decided that I might as well risk losing the rest of the money myself. So I started to get involved with the stock market. So I started studying. Oh, I spent time and time again. And I even joined various exchanges, and eventually I managed to make some viability out of it. And along the way, I met Norwood.
What year was that?
Norwood, I guess it must have been probably about 1980, huh?
Yeah.
About 1980, yeah.
When you met Norwood.
And we became very close friends. And he was married at the time, but his wife was ailing. So we couldn't get married. She died about 10 years ago. Maybe 15 years ago she died. And then we got married. And where'd we get married? We got married in an airport.
Yeah, I've been there. I was invited.
You were there at the wedding.
Yeah,
right?
I was at the wedding.
Yeah, right.
Me, Grace, Susan.
Yeah, and the altar was an old whirlybird.
Yeah.
And the minister is a pilot also.
Oh my God.
Do you remember Romantic Norwood crying at the wedding? You missed the wedding. That's right.
Yeah, I got there late.
Late.
Because I got lost.
Yes, that's
I went to, I got a different road, and then I didn't have the GPS back then.
Yeah.
The GPS thing. Yeah, and then I got there late. I got for the cake. I got there for the party.
That's right. Well, Norwood is at the altar, and all of a sudden I know he's crying. He's the one that was crying at the wedding. And
he's an artist.
He's an artist.
He's an artist.
What can I say? And so we been living here. I've been living in this apartment since 1958, and raised children here.
How many kids?
Huh?
How many kids?
Well, I actually had 3. I lost one of them in an accident which I had no control over, and that ruined my marriage. At that time, it was before Norwood.
It was a car or a plane? Then?
No, it was with a snowmobile.
A snowmobile.
Yeah. But let's not talk about that.
Yeah.
So,
When did we start? When did you start volunteering for the? Now it's educational life.
Learning
our life. Yeah. When was that?
Oh, that has to be before I was recording for the blind. I used to record for a blind outfit. Why a blind outfit? Because I had a favorite aunt who in 1932 was married to a big German man, and she had 3 children, and he used to beat her.
Oh.
And the only one that helped her was my mother. And she got us, this was during the Depression, right in the bottom of the Depression. She got some money together so my aunt could go off to California with her 3 infants. And she did it all by herself. And she did very well out in California. She started, she became a master stenotypist and was working for the government out there. And along after she retired, she finally went blind. And because I admired her so much that I thought I should do some volunteering for blind. And I was reading magazines for the blind. And I didn't particularly like reading magazines. And then a fellow arbitrator, Susan Lushing, you know her?
Yes.
Yeah. We had arbitration together, and we were talking, and she was saying that she worked for recording for the blind. And I said, well, what do you do? And she told me. So I said, boy, I'd like to do that. And she said, why don't you come along? So I did, and that's how I got involved with the recording for the blind. And that has to be 15, 18 years ago.
Susan,
they had a couple of different locations since then.
They started actually right after Second World War. They said the history of the place. When the soldiers came back and they needed they need to read, but they had lost their sight. So that's when the group of ladies started at the public library. That's how the story goes. I met you, I think it was back in 1999, because I started volunteering there in 1999. I think that's when we met for the first time. And then I met Susan. Susan teaches law at St. John's.
St. John's.
And Grace and all that wonderful people.
A lot of great people.
Yeah. How about the motorcycle? When did you start riding bikes?
I guess I started riding bikes during the war. Because they were sometimes it was the only good thing to use. And so I learned to ride the bicycles, and then when I come back, my brother got involved with bicycles and bikes, so I also would be able to use them. And now up at this airport, Warwick Airport, I still have a small Honda, tiny Honda, and I use it occasionally up there. It isn't licensed anymore, and I just use it at the airport.
Inside the airport.
And it's good to go around and see the airport. You've got a couple of runways on an airport. You've got a lot of walking to do.
Yeah, that's true.
And of course a lot of grass to cut and things like that. But that's how I became involved with the motorcycles, because I was always interested in engines or automobiles. I used to import from Germany automobiles, and I bought in from Germany a used Mercedes 300D, which I paid something like $2,200 here, delivered here, which was a great car, and I kept that for years and did a lot of work on it and serviced it, and talking about servicing, I got an award from the FAA for services, a partnership service they called it, and it was being presented up at the at an airport, a Republic airport. And as I was there, I was giving a little talk about it, and I started to talk about the old Holmes Airport, and there were mechanics also being awarded to those mechanics who had been mechanics for over 50 years.
Oh my God.
And they were given a special award. And so I was telling stories about them and how I did so appreciate them, because they would help me out tremendously when I was a young kid. And they were really, were just generous of their time. And all of a sudden, out of the background, somebody's talking, "Hey, Robina!" It was one of the old mechanics from Holmes Airport that he knew me back then. Isn't that a wonderful thing?
Wow.
That's one of the great things about living a while. So many times you get somebody who's lived in that area.
Interesting. And well, the purpose of this interview is because of this trip that I'm going to make to Brazil, from New York to Rio, and I'm going to be interviewing interesting people with interesting stories, and that's why Robina is the first one. I don't know anyone in New York City with such a vast experience and that made so many interesting things in her life, and it's so productive. Robina is extremely talented in building things, in making things, from like dealing with airplanes, engines, radars, radios, computers. She built her own. She wrote her own code. So she can
build my own machines.
She basically builds her own machines, and that's important. But one thing that I'd like to close with is, and then I'll ask Robina if there's anything else that she wants to point out, that she wants to share with us. She has very simple ways of explaining how to live a good life. And one of them, and I asked her, Robina, once I asked her, what was the secret for living a good life, and she told me this, and let's see if she remembers. What is in your point of view the secret for living a good life, Robina? What's the catch?
Enjoy everything that you do. There isn't anything in the world that should be painful to you, no matter what the job is, no matter how boring it is. If you're in a boring job, think about other things. Maybe think about better ways of doing it, but enjoy what you're doing and enjoy your life. Never let your life get dull, and never ever be afraid of anything. I am now Norwood's caretaker. He, of course, has got a lot of problems. But I can't tell you how sometimes you find yourself thinking, why am I putting this up? Well, that's what's great about living for a while and enjoying it, because you can actually find enjoyment of doing something that is different. Accidentally, not so long ago, Norwood fell or collapsed on the floor here. Well, I can't pick him up. We had to devise ways of getting him up on that sofa right there where he's sitting. And believe me, it took us a couple of hours to figure out how to do it. And it was done. And then after we did it, we laughed at each other. We said it was very funny. Now we know how to pick them off the floor, how to do it. And that's, I think, is what is important about living. And of course, respect everybody. don't care who it is, give them respect.
Great.
Yeah.
Any other thing you want to share with us?
Well, I'm not at all available to leave the earth yet.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a lot of things to do,
and you're not gonna. You have so much energy, so much things to share.
And so I don't want to leave. I want to enjoy my life, and I'm sorry that you people have all these problems in the world. I'd like to stick around to see how they're resolved.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the debt limit. Mm-hmm. We've got to solve that problem. And the Near East and all the terror strikes and so forth. Oh, those things make me so sad that they continue. It's a shame. Mm-hmm. But there were a lot of bad things going on back in the 40s with World War II, I can tell you that. Mm-hmm. And so I guess this is human nature. Mm-hmm. I think that's enough.
Great. That's a great way of finishing this. And I wanna give Robina a hug if Nor would allow me, because I love this lady. Because she's one of the greatest.
Thank you. Thank you, my dear.
Thank you, Robina.